Before the 9 to 5 ruled everything, Americans made a living in ways that didn't need a boss at all. For most of American history, the idea that you would get into a car, drive to an office or a factory, clock into work for someone else, and then collect a steady paycheck every 2 weeks was not the only way, or even the main way, that people put food on the table. For generation after generation, Americans made their money through 100 different small, independent hustles, trades, and ventures, very often running several of them at the very same time. Many of those old ways of earning a living have been almost completely forgotten now, crowded out and made to seem strange by the total dominance of the modern salaried job. But as more and more people today go searching for independence, for security, and for extra streams of income, these old paths are very much worth remembering. These are the forgotten ways Americans made a living without a traditional job. First, the home-based trade. Countless Americans, for most of our history, ran a real and thriving business right out of their own homes. There was the seamstress who took in sewing and mending from the whole neighborhood. There was the barber who cut hair right in his kitchen. There was the woman who baked pies, bread, and cakes to sell to her neighbors and the local store. In every case, the home itself was the workplace. The overhead costs were almost nothing at all, and the income that came in was entirely and completely their own. The skill held in their 2 hands was the whole of the business. Second, raising and selling directly from the land. Even families who were not full-time farmers in any sense almost always kept a few chickens and sold the surplus eggs. They kept a cow and sold the extra butter and milk to neighbors. They grew a larger garden than they strictly needed and sold the surplus vegetables at a roadside stand or the local market. A small flock of hens or a single productive garden plot could turn quietly into a steady, dependable trickle of cash, week after week after week, with no employer and no boss involved anywhere in the process. Third, the traveling tradesman. The roads and lanes of old America were traveled by a whole class of independent workers who brought their skills directly to the customer's door. There was the tinker who mended pots and pans. There was the knife and scissor grinder who pushed his sharpening wheel from town to town. There was the peddler with a wagon piled high with useful goods for sale. Each of these men carried either a valuable skill or a stock of merchandise directly to the people who needed it, earning his living out on the open road, beholden to no one in the world but the customers he served well enough to keep. Fourth, piecework and cottage manufacturing. Before nearly everything moved permanently into the great factories, an enormous amount of manufacturing was actually done in people's homes. Men and women were paid by the piece to assemble, to sew, or to finish goods right in their own front parlors, working at their own pace and on their own schedule. Often the entire family would work together around the kitchen table in the evenings, turning out finished products and being paid honestly for exactly the amount of work they completed, no more and no less. Fifth, taking in boarders and lodgers. A family that happened to have a spare room very rarely let it sit empty and unproductive. Instead, they took in boarders, providing a clean room and very often home-cooked meals as well in exchange for a weekly fee. In an age before hotels and motels were found in every town, renting out the spare space in your own home was one of the most common, reliable, and respectable ways for a household, and very often, especially for a widow with no other means, to bring in steady and much-needed money. Sixth, seasonal and harvest work. All across the country, resourceful people followed the rhythm of the seasons to piece together their yearly income. They helped bring in a neighbor's harvest in the autumn for pay. They cut great blocks of ice from frozen lakes and rivers in the dead of winter to be stored and sold all through the following summer. They tapped the maple trees for syrup in the early spring. The work came and went with the turning of the calendar, and a clever, hard-working person could stitch together a complete year's living from many different seasonal jobs. Seventh, hunting, trapping, and fishing for the market. The natural bounty of the American land and water was, to those who truly knew how to take it, very much the same as money in the bank. People trapped animals for their valuable furs and sold them at the trading post. They hunted game and sold the meat at the market. They caught fish and brought them fresh into town to sell. It was hard, skilled, often dangerous work, but it turned the natural world directly into a real and steady income for anyone who was willing to learn its ways and put in the effort. Eighth, crafting goods by hand to sell. The so-called maker economy that we hear so much about today is in truth nothing new at all. People built furniture in their barns and sheds. They wove baskets. They made sturdy brooms. They sewed beautiful quilts. And they carved all manner of useful items to sell or to trade to their neighbors. A person with a genuine craft and a little raw material could produce real, lasting value with their own labor and skill, and then sell that value directly to the people around them who needed it and would gladly pay for it. Ninth, providing services for the household and the farm. There was always, in every community, a great deal of work that needed doing and that people would happily pay another to do for them. There was laundry and washing to be taken in. There was hauling and delivery to be done with the wagon and a team of horses. There was butchering, well digging, and repair work of every imaginable kind. A willing worker with a useful skill and a strong back could very nearly always find some neighbor in need of a hand and ready to pay a fair price for it. 10th, and most important of all, the multiple income mindset. Perhaps the single most valuable lesson from all of this is that very, very few people in old America relied on just one single source of money. A typical family might keep a vegetable garden, take in a boarder, sell their surplus eggs, do some mending for the neighbors, and pick up seasonal work at harvest time, all of it at the very same time. And if one of those streams happened to dry up, as streams always do, the others were still there to carry the family through. They built their security not on the fragile foundation of a single paycheck from a single employer, but on many small, independent streams of income that they themselves owned and controlled. What truly stands out about every single one of these old ways of earning is the spirit that lies behind them all, a deep, practical, stubborn independence. These Americans did not sit and wait around to be hired by someone else. They looked hard at what they could grow, make, fix, or offer to the world, and then they turned it into money entirely on their own terms. The single full-time job, with one employer holding all of your eggs in one very fragile basket, is actually a fairly recent and, in many ways, a fairly precarious arrangement in the long sweep of human history. Our ancestors knew better than to depend on it completely. They spread their bets, they kept their many skills sharp and ready, and they stayed firmly in control of their own livelihoods. And in an uncertain and rapidly changing economy like our own, that old mindset of patiently building several small streams of income with your own two hands may very well be one of the most genuinely valuable things they ever knew.